We recently shared a winter preparation video for RVs and motorhomes. And now, after a few weeks of being in the cold and a few days of being in the extreme cold, we want to share some of the things we did right, some of the things we could have done better, and maybe some alternatives to our decision to be here in the cold. Okay, first I want to talk about skirting because I underestimated the usefulness of skirting. I may have been a little bit arrogant thinking we didn't need it. I was hoping we didn't need it. There's some reasons I didn't want to do it, and I'll tell you those. The materials cost a few $100s and it takes most of a day to install it. I'd never done it before, and if we put skirting, the typical foam, insulated foam board around this, then we would not probably have access to any of our basement bays. It would be a huge pain to get in and out of them if we blocked the underneath properly with skirting. Didn't want to do it. The more expensive option is called air skirts. I've got a picture of each types of skirting that people around us have installed. The air skirts for our neighbors over here is custom to your rig. You take measurements that they tell you how to take, and they build these airbags, high quality, durable sections of airbag that go just underneath the edge of your motorhome, and then you air it up and it fills that space. And then you do the next one and next one all the way around, and then they tie together so the wind can't blow them away. So it's really a good system for $3,500. So somewhere between say 500-ish and 3,500 is kind of the range of budget skirting and less than budget skirting, let's say. And then the other caveat is we we bought the motorhome as all electric, and what that means is we don't have propane. We have diesel. So the systems that would burn propane in a propane RV. In ours, either use electric, like the cooktop, electric cooktop versus propane or whatever, or they use diesel. So in our house here, the hot water heater system is tankless and uses diesel in the aqua hot system to create hot water on demand. And then the furnace system, when it's too cold to run the heat pumps, the furnace runs the diesel through the aqua hot again, burns diesel to create warm air, basically. For people that burn propane, you set your propane tank out at the end of your driveway at this campground, and they come around and pick it up on a golf cart and fill it up and bring it right back and just charge your account. Very handy. For us, they don't bring diesel, and I haven't looked into yet a paid service to deliver diesel to us. So that means we have to roll down the road 7.7 miles to the Sap Brothers because that's the closest one in our discount network. Last time saved us about 70 cents a gallon, so it's worth going a couple of extra miles. But rolling down the road to get diesel, if we had everything skirted, that would be a bad day because you normally put the skirting up before it gets cold. If you're tearing it down, going to get fuel, and putting it back up, you're talking hours and hours and hours of prep before and after just to go get some fuel. And what we learned recently is when it's super cold out and the furnace is running pretty much 24/7, we burned 60 gallons of diesel in 35 days. We filled it up 7.7 miles away and drove back, so we probably used a gallon. And then when we went and filled up, we added 60 gallons. So we burned 59 gallons of diesel to keep this place warm for a little over a month. So all of that to say, that's part of why I didn't want to do skirting. However, the struggles we had with keeping some of our bays warm is proof that skirting makes a real difference. It's cutting down, not only cutting down the airflow that passes underneath the rig and therefore causes cold to kind of soak up into the bottom of those bays. It's also keeping the temperature, it's an insulation barrier. So any warmth under the rig stays under the rig instead of just blowing away. Thankfully, we got, I don't know, a foot or two of snow the last 2 or 3 days. So recently, I finally realized that I could use snow for free, a snow shovel and 30 minutes work, and just throw snow at the rig until it builds a pile up next to the motorhome and blocks all the air. So I completely circled the rig with a barrier of snow, and I'm not even kidding. Instantly, all the temperatures in the house and the bays started to rise. So that was a big deal. I underestimated the value of a skirt. I still don't think I would add one. I don't know. If I added a skirt, then I have to find fuel delivery. So I'd have to pay for skirting, put in the time to do it, and pay extra to have diesel brought, or I could buy a 10-gallon fuel tank, plastic tank, and haul diesel, very ironically, in our electric car back and forth to fill up the motorhome 10 gallons at a time. So it would have taken me, say, 6 trips back and forth in the car, which honestly would be less effort than the tear down and setup of the rig, even without skirting. It's a couple of hours before and a couple of hours after to do that. So it's a pretty tiring day for us to go down the road and add diesel to this thing. So, and it makes you question, should we have gotten propane instead of diesel? I'm still happy with not having to get propane. Most of the time we're not anywhere that the diesel burns this fast. Our first stop in Arizona, the diesel lasted, I mean, after 2 months, it used under half a tank. So, um, very little because it's for hot water for the showers at that point. It's not running the furnace at all in Arizona. So I did underestimate the value of skirting, but I don't know what I would do in hindsight. And I wouldn't always necessarily have the good fortune of having 2 to 3 foot drifts of snow on each side, literally on each side, about 5 feet to 6 feet away from the RV was all this perfect snow. And it was easy to shovel. It wasn't super icy or anything. It was just fluffy, slightly wet snow. So I just scooped it, turned and tossed it, scooped it, turned and tossed it until I had I'll share a picture of. So skirting underestimated, but I still don't know if I would do it for money and hassle. I guess we have to, but the goal is to not be in the cold in future winters. Another common thing to do when it's going to be cold out is to drip or run a little water inside. It's common inside of houses as well. The campground we're staying at texted everybody and said, please run your water for the next several nights to try to help avoid freeze ups. They don't want their personnel to have to come out in the middle of the night and help thaw your water spigot. So keep some water running. Well, some people will leave their black and gray closed all the time. We leave our gray open. Of course, you close your black. If you don't know why, please look into it. But we leave the gray open because it's just convenient. And it's probably 50-50 what people do on that. And if you leave your gray closed, you can't run your water to keep it from freezing. So we started running our water because it makes sense to not allow the water to freeze. And if the water is running, it won't freeze as easily if the water is running, basically. So then I had this thought that if our dump hose were to freeze somehow, because it's our first time to do this in this kind of cold, but if our dump hose froze and our gray tank filled up and our water was running, that could become a problem. So one of the things we had to learn to do was frequently check the gray tank level. So just another lesson learned. Another thing we learned was I'll share the story. At 5:30 in the morning, I got up to go to the bathroom. Every time we wake up in the night, we check the heating pad light that our 16-year-old kitty lays on all day when it's super cold out. And if the light is off because it has a 2-hour timer, we hit the button and turn the heating pad back on for her. And the light was on, so I go to the bathroom and I come back a minute later and that light is off. And I'm like, okay, so I hit the buttons, it wouldn't come on. I noticed it was sheer luck that I noticed on the power outlet on the wall that was plugged into that the light was turned. There's a little tiny light for GFCIs. So learn your GFCIs locations and watch for the lights because when the light's on, it has tripped. So I noticed that some of our basement bays were cold and I didn't know why, and I pressed the GFCI reset in our bedroom, and the circuits on the outlets on that circuit are affected by that GFCI. So all that to say, we've learned to look at GFCI lights and the lights on the extension cord that we run into the house from the pedestal. I don't have an alarm set up. I'm going to look for a way to alarm us when power drops on any of these situations we have, the direct on the 30 amp or in the house or whatever. But for now, we're just saying train yourself to look for those clues. find the correlations, see patterns, and be able to troubleshoot quickly. Because when the temperature of a critical bay or your spigot is dropping quickly, you need to know what's going on and take action to correct it as quickly as possible. Another thing we learned is that our emergency egress door off the master bedroom, the only bedroom, has no insulation because of the way it's constructed, basically. So in the bedroom slide, there is a square that pops open. You take the headboards off. I may have shown it in other videos. The headboards pop off. There's just a handle. It pops out, so stairs flip out. So if there happened to be a fire, heaven forbid, in the front part of the house while we're in the back or while we're sleeping, we wouldn't have to drop 9 feet out of a window and hit the ground and break our hip and die in a burning motorhome on the ground. But the egress door, it is a good idea to have, I think. It is another emergency way out that's not through a window. But the way these are built on this one, it's not insulated. So uh, I saw some our water. Check out our water leak detection sensors, the YoLink videos. We have two different ones on YoLink for temperature and leaking. The water leak sensor that I had put on the floor under the headboard had triggered recently and alerted us to a leak. And we noticed when we took the headboards off that inside the egress door, there's frost and ice building up. It's just because there's warmth on the inside, it's super cold on the outside. The frost grows up the walls on that thing. And so what I've been doing now is every day I run a fan, not a heater, just a fan, a little tiny fan that oscillates back and forth all day. And it very slowly melts that frost down so that it doesn't run, it doesn't drip, it just evaporates as it melts by blowing the warmth of the air, the relative warmth of the air in the bedroom onto that wall. So that's working to deal with that frost. But that was a lesson learned. Something else I did was I had read that our heated hose is only rated to -20, and we were forecasting -24 actual temperatures coming up. And I'd also read that people say theirs failed at -8. So it's like, well, I don't want my freshwater hose to break or fail or any of that. So I went and bought some 1-inch pipe insulation pieces. And basically these are 6-inch or 6 foot long little insulation pieces. It looks just like a pool noodle. And they have different size diameters on the center. The biggest ones I saw at either store I went to is 1 inch. Just barely big enough to get around the hose and leave a tiny gap on the other side. So I put that gap on the ground side of the hose. I think it's an R3, but uh, it was worth a few bucks to extra insulate our heated water hose and try to avoid it freezing and breaking. And then once we got some snow on the ground, obviously the snow is an insulation barrier as well. So um, the water has not frozen in all of this time. So that was a good, I think that was a good add-on to the heated water hose to make sure it stays heated and doesn't shut down and break. We didn't make any changes on the heated dump hose that we put together that was shared in the winter preparation video that we posted before. That seems to be working well. We saw on a Facebook group that somebody had a very similar setup to ours, except their last little elbow into the dump port was completely exposed and had no heat tape around it. And so, you see that post and it looks scary and it's frozen solid. You can see a lot of those are see-through. The little elbow was solid ice. And theirs was sticking off the ground a good 6 inches. The top of where they plug it in was several inches off the ground, and then this thing, and then fully exposed, no covering, no nothing. Ours is different in that I had heat tape wrapped around the elbow, and I have a rock bag, a gravel bag over the top of it, and it's low to the ground, very low to the ground. And then once the snow came, that whole thing is just buried, so it's more insulation. So we haven't had any freezing of our heated dump hose. Another thing Rhoda thought to do, we'd talked a lot about buying these insulated blankets that they sell for RVs. And they make them for the door because there tends to be drafty on the doors. Those doors aren't made all that solid, so there tends to be a nice draft of air coming through there, especially when it's cold. You can feel it. They also make such things for between the house and the cab. Rhoda just took one of our spare blankets and hung it up there and then taped it to the walls on either side, and that helped a lot. I mean, especially when it gets super duper cold, we have a shade that pulls down that's pretty thick, and it does a decent job of keeping heat and cold contained. But on these extremes, the blanket was an added bonus. The cab, I mean, it's so cold up there, the cab is forming ice on the inside of the windows and on some of the panels and stuff. So hopefully that's not doing any damage, but it is sparing the house from extreme cold. Another lesson learned is balancing of power while we're doing this. One of the things you do is add space heaters to various places. Be sure to use the properly sized extension cord, 12 gauge, or even better than that. Um, if you don't, you can have a risk of starting fires, and if the cord is warm, it's not the right size. It's not big enough. So get at least 12 gauge for space heaters. Depends on the watts they're pulling, right? So do your homework, understand the proper sizing of extension cords versus what you're running on the extension cord. Anyway, as we were running uh, high quality extension cords around to different bays to add space heaters, we learned that our 30 amp inverter is a single leg inverter, and a space heater plugged in the house was consuming, say, 12 and a half or 14 and a half watts of our 30 amp inverter, single line inverter, which didn't leave us a lot of headroom for running the microwave, toaster, cooktop, stuff like that. So if we didn't remember to turn off the space heater first, we would blow the breaker on the inverter. So to overcome that, Rhoda had the idea to run an extension cord directly from the pedestal through the driver's side window into the house and run one of the larger space heaters on that. So that means it is pulling from the pedestal, but it's not going through the inverter. We don't lose inverter capacity while we have one of the space heaters running. So it's convenient to roll down one of the windows, the driver's side cab window. So I used foam to allow me to close the window and seal that gap, and then a little bit of tape on one end to finish closing off the hole. So I don't feel any cold air coming through there, and that cord comes in just fine. But all that just to say, you got to know your power situation, especially in a time when you're popping little 300 or 400 watt space heaters in different bays and things like that. One of the things we did prior to the super cold coming, I got paranoid that the bays with 400 watt, 350 or 400 watt heaters were not going to be enough. So I paranoidly ordered 6 more space heaters from Amazon, thinking if we need them, we'll use them. If we don't, we'll send them back. But the additional ones I had 3 that were 5-inch square in size, but they did 400 watts or 800 watts with a little switch in the back. So I thought, well, if the 400s aren't enough, I'll just jump to 800, and maybe that's, and then I could fine tune the amount of heat that we're producing versus the amount of power that we're pulling, because I'm trying not to blow breakers. It would not be fun at 3 o'clock in the morning when it's minus 50 wind chill to go out and flip a breaker on the pedestal out there. So then I also bought some forced air that are 750 watt or 1500 watt. And there's a couple spots where we ended up needing those to keep up with the level of cold. So some of those are directly to the pedestal, some of those are off the house power, so they're hitting that inverter with the 30 amp limit. And so far we have, knock on wood, a good balance of the total pedestal power, the 30 amp plug on the pedestal, and the 30 amp inverter. Even though our house is a 50 amp RV, if you have batteries and an inverter, there's a high probability your inverter is only 30 amps because it's a lot cheaper. And then there's a single line versus a dual line 30 amp inverter, and that's a whole nother video. Um, I do plan to do an electrical video, by the way, since we've learned a whole bunch of stuff in the past month on that. So all that just to say, you do have to balance the power and live within your power means as you're trying to survive super cold and adding devices to add heat, whether it be a incandescent bulb or larger and larger space heaters to keep ahead of the cold. So once the snow skirt was put in place, and once I got the space heaters, the 2 key space heaters that I needed to keep the basement warm, I replaced both of the 350, 400 watt space heaters with either 800 or I think 800 for both of them is what they're running at. Maybe 1500 on one of them. But I did end up replacing both space heaters that we had before with new ones. And I ended up adding a space heater to a bay adjacent to the wet bay. The wet bay does not have room for a space heater at all. So I put a space heater in the adjacent bay, cleaned out the space. So I had a lot of empty space to set the space heater away from the wall a little ways, hoping I could blow air onto that shared wall and soak some warm air into the next bay. It seems to be working surprisingly well. It added a few degrees to the wet bay. So that is just to say I ended up upgrading or swapping out the smaller space heaters for larger space heaters with more watts, more power, more output. Once that was done, with the skirting and the larger space heaters in place, all of our spaces were staying above freezing. So that was good. The wet bay wasn't staying above freezing, but I've come to believe that the AquaHot has a way of keeping it warm that's not well understood by me or maybe even by Tiffin. I seem to get the runaround when I try to find somebody who can explain it to me. Other Tiffin owners have been told that have this model that they've been assured that the AquaHot does provide heat to the wet bay some way, somehow. And the way it works is being debated still among owners, but maybe someday I'll understand that. But shockingly, when the wet bay was at 18 degrees, and keep in mind, my sensor is laying on the floor on the far side from the wall that's got the heat blowing against it. So my little temperature sensor may not be accurately reflecting the temperature up where the pipes, the plumbing, not pipes, but the plumbing, the water plumbing is up higher in the bay. Heat rises, and maybe the AquaHot is keeping that space warm. I do know that 18 degrees, the cold water kept running. So something good is going on in the wet bay. But once I added that space heater in the adjacent bay, I definitely was getting the wet bay to be warmer. And then once we got the snow skirt up, the wet bay was even warmer still. So the big gap, uh, despite the wet bay being below freezing, it was functioning. So I'm not sure it was below freezing, but the big gap in our setup and our preparations was behind the refrigerator. There's an outside access door to the bottom part of the refrigerator from the outside wall of the motorhome. And so basically this gives us access to the plumbing for the ice maker in the refrigerator. And we were paranoid that it might get cold in there, or what if it sprung a leak? So of course it has a water leak detector in there and a temperature sensor. And until it got super cold, it was fine. But when it got super cold out, that bay started approaching freezing and below. So a couple days ago, I put a couple strips of Gorilla Tape. That door hinges open, and of course there's a gap around the door. I double strip taped all the way around that door, and that did give us 2 or 3 degrees of added warmth in that bay, but it wasn't enough. When it got down to negative teens, negative 20 plus, that bay was getting down to the low teens, and there is not any AquaHot providing heat to that, I guarantee you. All you have is the compressor back there that runs on a cycle, and you can see like clockwork on the chart on our YoLink app. You can see the temperature go up and down as the compressor cycles. Well, the compressor itself was not enough to keep it above freezing without that door having more insulation. So yesterday afternoon, kind of late, it was already starting to get cold. Late in the afternoon, I tried to put some additional insulation material on the outside of the motorhome over that door. The door is like maybe, I don't know, a foot by 2 feet or something like that, rectangular. So I was going to borrow a sheet of insulation from the neighbor here. He's got a sheet left, like 2 or 3 inch thick, and just put it right over there and tape it up. The tape would not stick to that insulation. It's Gorilla Tape. It sticks to everything. And the tape wouldn't stick to the insulation, and it wouldn't stick to the cold walls of the motorhome. So I thought, great. So I just left it and thought it's probably already frozen. And it's easy to access, so if something has broken, it should be an easy fix. Today, I thought, well, how about HVAC tape, that shiny metal silver tape used on HVAC systems? And sure enough, it sticks really well. So I had an old mat that I took for gun classes, where you need to lay on the ground. There's sharp rocks in the ground, so you buy this mat that folds up and you throw it down and you lay on it for shooting. And I kept that for the RV life because it's good for laying on the ground to work on stuff or to get under the rig or whatever. So it folds into, it's got 5 1-foot sections and it folds like a map. Some people won't know what folding like a map means, but bless you if you do. You're my people. So I folded it to be just a little bit bigger than the shape of that door. And I also had a rectangular piece of insulation, just some batting, a piece of insulation. I put that inside, folded that into this thing, and with the HVAC tape, I got that taped over that refrigerator access door this afternoon. The HVAC tape stuck and held. I put a lot on there. I don't think it's going to risk our paint, but you got to take care of the cold now and the paint later, whatever. So immediately the temperature sensor in that space came up, and it has stayed above freezing ever since then. So that was a big win. The extra insulation on the outside of that has allowed the refrigerator backside to be above freezing now all this time. Tonight's going to get to negative 22 again. We're on the way there now. It's already negative 12 or 13 out. Negative 15 as I glance at my phone here, and heading to negative 22. So it'll be a huge win if we keep the back of the fridge over freezing. Maybe it has a chance to thaw. Hopefully there's not a leak. That would be a problem in the middle of the night. I'd have to go out there and rip all that stuff off, open the door, turn that water handle off if it broke after it versus before it. Anyway, so far, having solved now the refrigerator temperature, all of the spaces are where they should be on temperature, and we're going into this next cold spell for a day or two, and then we get slightly warmer where we're like at 0 or maybe a little over 0, and then back into the negative teens for a day or two or three a few days later. So we're learning as we go. We've learned what we did that worked. We've learned some things that didn't work well, some things we should have done differently. And then one thing that we thought of as we were in the middle of this desperately trying to survive the cold situation, the thought process entered our mind of, what if we really do have to abandon ship? What does that look like? So I made a list in the phone and started just saying, all right, we got to take the cat and cat food and cat litter, and just I wanted to think of everything so we didn't have to make a lot of trips back and forth. I made arrangements with family members in the area to stay with them. Um, and started thinking, under what scenario if we lost power and say the generator didn't work, or say the furnace quit working, or say the running water stopped, even though just cold water for a while, that's livable. I had cold running water and I had a furnace that worked and electricity and the internet was working. So I could stay here and manage and maintain what was going on with temperature and potential for leaks and stuff like that. But what if? So started cooking up this plan, but that same day realized the snow skirt issue. That helped so much. Realized we need to insulate the refrigerator access door. And as those pieces came together, they were the final little pieces to push us over the edge. The hot water came back on, the toilet water started flushing, and I'll show you what happens. I learned if you're, it turns out that inside all of the lines, there's this stuff that attaches to the lines, and it's normal. It's not unhealthy. I talked to a 74-year-old retired plumber that knows this stuff inside and out. When the toilet water was restored, there was a little black flake, so I'll share a picture of it here. And so I sent a picture to Bob, and Bob said, "Oh yeah, that's in all the lines it forms. It's not the bad stuff, but it's the stuff that forms. And anytime there's a freezing event, it breaks that stuff free, and then you see it. So it's always in there. It's not harmful in any way, but a freeze gives you a deep cleaning of those lines, so to speak. So that was interesting." But the toilet water started running again after it got that space underneath that bathroom warmed up enough. I basically replaced the heater that was in there, and then I doubled the amount of watts that it was drawing. That warmed that space up into the 60s, and eventually the toilet water worked. Eventually the hot water started. I got hot water back today. That was a big deal. And the temperature was able to reach upper 60s, lower 70s in the house. So I don't think abandoning ship is going to be necessary, but it is good to have a plan, right? The other thing I thought of was we could have either driven the rig a month ago to the south and stored it somewhere warm, or we could have winterized it and stored it here and moved into a house to get through this extreme cold, or we could have found indoor storage and paid them for an air conditioned or a conditioned environment indoor storage of the RV. There was one place that I found. I emailed them. They were full, didn't have any capacity, so I gave up basically. Now the goal is certainly to live in this. This is our home. This is our choice. But you have to start thinking about the extremes in a situation like this where it could become deadly. What do we do? What could we have done differently? Store it, drive it south. Got friends in South Texas now that we've met recently who have a place down there, and they were happy to store it for free. So that's a bonus. And drive me back to the Corpus airport, perhaps to fly back here. But we could have also driven the rig down a month ago, stored it wherever, and driven the car back and stayed. That would be a little bit extreme, but storage here might have been an option. But again, so many people live in their campers through the winter all over the world successfully. And some of those campers are little metal boxes, not to be arrogant or anything, and they survive just fine. So they did it, we can do it. It's just a learning curve. And we have learned a ton. And so I wanted to share with humility the things we learned in the past, I don't know, just a week or so as the temperatures got cold or super cold, and what worked and what didn't, and what we did differently and what we had to change to adapt to the conditions. If this content has any value at all to you, if it's entertaining in any way, please like and subscribe. Also check out the Instagram that Rhoda runs, also called Traveling with Troy and Rhoda. Thank you for visiting. Thank you for watching. Please share this content with your friends, and appreciate you very much.